Hello, welcome. Happy Monday. I don't know if anybody's in there in the chat yet, but if there is and you are hearing this, if it needs adjustments, let me know. I can adjust the sound or the music. Let me know what you need. Today, we're going to take our Twitter clone that we've been working on. So here's the Twitter clone. We're going to kind of shift directions a little bit. We started to work on the JavaScript, but I think using the JavaScript, I think I'd like to clean up the CSS first. And I just noticed I still have not fixed that little icon there, so that'll be one thing we'll need to fix. But essentially, I think what I'd like to do, last week we added this hover over the profile box. You can follow and unfollow. So that's still good. So the next piece is that I would, if I was building this sort of as a project to mock up for a prototype, I would build a backend using local storage to be able to add and manipulate the data. So you can simulate using it as if it had a backend. But I think in order to, before I do that, I think I want to just clean up the CSS. And we'll also switch it over to SASS instead of CSS. So we've done everything in CSS, basic CSS. We've seen how that's been done. We've done everything with classes, which I was originally going to switch everything over to the BEM methodology, the block element model methodology, which we started to do a little bit with these __ names. So the block is profile, and then the element is the name element, and then you've got modifiers in here somewhere. Usually buttons and of course we have variables, so they're being used all into here. Let's see. I'm sure we've used there we go, button inverted, button -- inverted. So this is the modifier, so that's the block element modifier. M block element modifier. Approach, which is you have your block, so that might be dot button block button text. That would be like the element, and then you've got your button. This would be like. And then you might have your button inverted. Modifier. So that would be how you would maybe implement that. But instead, let's go back to here. In the README, I'm going to add maybe some of this stuff here. So instead, we are going classless using a minimal class CSS approach. And what this is we style elements based on their something like that. It'll make sense when we start getting into it. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new folder, and this is going to be called my I'm going to create a source folder, and in there I'm going to create a new folder called styles, and in styles I'm going to create a new file called style.scss. Then I'm going to come into here, and just to get started we'll just give a body background color red. And we can get rid of the preview. And now I've got a plugin, I think it's a plugin, either that or it's built into VS Code now. It was a plugin originally, to watch SASS. And what that'll do is it'll compile this SASS SCSS. So SASS is a pre-compiler, so you can do things like nesting is probably the biggest thing. So I can say body that has a div. Background color green. So obviously you can't put a div inside of a body in regular styles, but you can in SASS. And so that creates this dist folder with a CSS inside of it and a style.min. So I'm going to actually move my index.html into the dist folder. And then I'm going to update my index.html to use css/style.min.css. And so that way we're also minifying. So now we've got this minified CSS that is the compiled version of this SASS. And so let's now our live server was using it before we moved it into the dist folder, but let's also create a JavaScript, and we'll move our main.js into there. And this is a pretty common pattern that you'll see. So like a source, which is your files that you're kind of editing and working with, so that would be right now this style.css that we've been working with, and then the dist is the distribution. So then basically when you want to deploy, you just basically upload this folder to where you want to deploy. And so now we'll get the live server started again with the index in that section. And there we go. So the styles have now been applied. Now we're using that new styles.min.css. And obviously it's all wonky like that. So we need to fix that. But our SASS is compiling. It's being watched. So every time we save SASS, it'll recompile and be updated. Now, one nice thing with SASS is that CSS is valid SASS. So I can just save this into my style.scss. If I had the terminal open, it's going to show changes detected, and so it output the new CSS. So now when we come back to here, we're back to where we were. So this is our existing CSS, but I think probably the best approach to do this, so we're taking this and we're actually turning it into a classless approach, is we have to remove all the classes from our styles. Sean Cameron, thank you for the follow. Welcome to the stream. Nice to see you. How are you doing today? So we've got this distribution here. I think that's all going to work, but what I might do is just trying to figure out what the best approach to this is. I think what I might do is create a new folder here called first, maybe, or classy. Well, we'll call it classy because that was originally oops, I don't want to move it, I want to copy it. So put this into our distribution, move there. Did I break it? Yeah, I definitely broke it. It might still be working again. Okay, back. Was this a file or a folder? What did I do here? So I'll just do this in Explorer. Yeah, I created a file. I want a folder. New folder, and this will be called Classy. In Classy, we're going to put our original style.css. We're going to put a copy of our index.html, and we're going to put a copy of our main.js. And in our Classy file, we're going to just reference the original style, and I think the JavaScript's going to be the same. Yeah. So now in the Git repo, so if you're interested in looking at the code for this, that's the link to the repo there. I'll push these changes to it afterwards. This is kind of the status quo as of day 7 where we were at. Everything that we did, maybe I'll name it that way actually. Day 7? No, I'm going to do it as Classy. We can rename it afterwards if we want to. But that way we have this reference to this is what it looked like before we started to make these kind of major changes. This is before refactoring. Maybe that's what we can call it. Pre-refactoring. Yeah. Sure. It really doesn't matter. So in our source, we just have our styles.css. I think I'm going to essentially get rid of it and start from scratch. I'll leave the colors because I want to try and grab some of those, how we're using those. And I will open up our style.css or CSS so that we have a reference to what it looked like before we started doing the refactoring. And then we can come into here and let's just start removing some of these classes that we don't need. So, and we might change a few things around. We have our main like this, and it's got right now a div with a class of main, so that's not even correct anyway. So instead of aside class equals navigation, I'm going to give this a name equals left sidebar. And so we have this is probably going to break. Yeah, obviously it's going to break. So let me I wonder if I can have, I don't think I can start another live server. Can I? What happens if I do this pre-refactor? Isn't that what it's called? Pre-refactor. Perfect. So now we have the existing one so that we can reference it once we start breaking it, because we're going to completely destroy this thing, all these styles. So let's just focus on the left sidebar for now. One thing that we will want to do though is I'm going to switch this instead of, right now we've got, these are kind of flex columns I think, but we'll probably switch it to a grid. So I'm going to give this a left sidebar name. And right now we have a top with the brand in it. And that is, I'm just going to shrink this. that is here. So how can we clean this up? No, I do want this like this. How can we clean this up? So do we need a div with the class at top? Not really. We know we're going to have the first one is going to be the top. So we can kind of clean this up. We're going to need a div. Do we need a brand? Probably not. And so the reason we needed that top was because there's space in between these two things. But if we know that we've only got these two containers, we can actually just make this container. So here's our bottom. Terran369, thank you for the follow. Nice to see you here. Welcome to the stream. How are you doing today? Please feel free, if you have any questions, go ahead and throw them in chat, and we can I can do my best to answer them. Just for awareness, what we're doing here is we've been working on building this. So this is a clone of Twitter, basically. We built the entire thing out using just standard HTML, CSS, and some JavaScript for these hovers here over the last 7 days or so. There's the link in the chat there for the Git repo. And we're going to take what we've done, which is our code that you're looking at here, and we're going to turn it into a classless CSS as much as we can. So get rid of some of these classes and see what we can do without them. It just makes for a much cleaner markup, and we'll be able to compare them too. So here's our refactoring. That's a hard word to say. Refactoring. Here's our pre-styles, and so then we'll be able to kind of do a comparison of how these look side by side. So for now, I'm not even going to put a name on it. I'm just going to give it this. Twitter clone looks on spot. Cool, thank you. Yeah, it's as close as we can possibly make it. Obviously, the icons are a little bit different. We used Font Awesome instead of the official ones there, but for the most part, and we can follow, we can unfollow, we can hover over people's images, and we will get to where we're actually going to build a local storage backend where we can play with it in the browser and add tweets and adjust, and essentially this is the process that I would do for mocking up a system like this for a client. So I'll leave this in here. So we have our brand, and it will need a container. Will it? We can probably get away without the container. So we just want this anchor with the Twitter icon. And so it gets a little bit of, it comes into a little bit of planning when you get into this classless CSS, because I'm going to say the first anchor in the aside style it this specific way. So if for some reason you wanted to change the markup, that's the one sort of caveat to some of this classless CSS, is that it kind of expects your markup to stay the way that it is, because you are going to be referencing things based on where they are in the DOM. Just means that if you make changes to your HTML, you're going to have to make changes to your CSS, which likely you would have to anyway. So now we have our nav. We don't actually even need an unordered list in here, so let's just clean that up. Let's just give these anchors. I think I'll leave it on their own lines like that, just because it reads a little bit cleaner. We do have these spans with the space. I think that's okay. I can even expand that a bit. No, let's leave that in there. Okay. So there's our nav with our anchors. We've got these classes in here because these ones we actually do need because they are related to the font awesome. We could maybe get away with this, but the new font awesome replaces things with SVGs, so we would have to do it kind of the old style way, and I haven't had a whole lot of luck doing it that way. There's things we could do to remove this, but for now I think this is, the approach is a minimal class CSS. It's not completely classless. But we've got our anchor, we've got our icon, we've got our text inside there, and I think for now I'm going to put this, yeah, let me think on that. I might be able to get rid of these spans around there, but for now we'll leave that. And we've got our tweet button, which is just a button, which is this button right here. And then it's supposed to have this icon beside it, but for some reason it doesn't. What is that? Am I hiding it or something? Tweet, we got our SVG, overflow visible with inherent. What does the real Twitter have? You have 15 years experience? Yeah, I've been coding for 15 years professional experience. I was even coding before that. When I was a kid, I started building text-based adventure games using QBasic. I loved it. But yeah, I worked for municipal government for 10 years, building enterprise applications for utility payments, tax payments, all that kind of stuff. Built a census application, web app, and did that for about 10 years, and then I've been kind of freelancing for the last 4 or 5 years. Yeah, so it doesn't have an icon, so I'm not even sure why that icon was in there. So I am going to just get rid of it. And in this case then, because we don't have an icon, we can get rid of the tweet. I think we can get rid of this. I don't think we actually need this. If we need it, we'll put it back in. Let's try and get rid of as much as we can and then only add in the things. That's kind of the approach I'm taking, is get rid of as many things as I can, make it as clean as possible, and then add in what we need. So we don't need the class of bottom. We don't need this profile container. Now here's where we do run into certain things where we may want to add classes. And that is, like for example, well, maybe not. Maybe we might not need to. So like something like this profile image, where each time it's styled the same. We want the round approach to it. That's something we might want to actually add a class, because we know that in each of these places where we have this image, we're going to want it to be that round. It just means that the alternative is that we have to style it here, here, and here, because we're only referencing it in there. So I will certainly play around with that. We might have to think on that. Let's go with the approach of not adding the classes, and then if we feel like we need to, we can add them in. And we might be able to do it through some semantic. So I've made this entire thing an anchor, because essentially it's this part here, which on Twitter is you click on it and it opens up this menu, which we haven't built the menu yet, and I don't think the hover's working right now. Oh, it is, okay. So back to, where's my code? Here we go. So inside of this anchor, right now we've got a div, which is the container for the profile image, and then there's the name, and then there's this arrow. And so the reason that we're doing that is so that we can say this goes left and this goes right, so that this stays here and this stays here. I think we can get rid of this. I do think on the image we're going to add a class, and that class is going to be profile image. So this is one case, or maybe I'll even say like rounded image. Yeah. So this is just to give it that round styling, so that way it's consistent across the site. So here's a case where I would use a class. But so far, we've had basically our wrapper class, which I might even be able to get rid of. I may change this to like a layout class, because it's something that I think actually I'm going to change this. I'm going to give this to main. And we do have two mains in here right now, which I'm going to get rid of at some point, but for now, no, sorry, I'm going to leave it as wrapper, but I will change that to a main at some point. You just started out last year after your bachelor's in CS? Cool. Self-taught, didn't pay attention in class. Yeah. So working with React now as per the trend. Yeah, exactly. After I left the city, we did a lot of cold fusion development, which isn't really a super popular. It's popular in government and medical field, but not in sort of day-to-day app development currently. But that's what we did a lot of for our backend at the city, and then JavaScript front end. It was big jQuery at the time, and React's kind of like the post cursor. I don't know if that's a word. The next iteration of jQuery in a way. It's like a front end framework, but it's not really a framework. It's depending on who you ask, I guess. How are you finding React? Do you enjoy it? So now, and so what's the reason that I have this like this? We have this image, I think, because we go top to bottom here. So that's kind of, we need a container for these so that we can say this goes top to bottom, one above the other. And I don't think I can think of a way around that. So we'll leave it at that. We have our strong, we have our span. We have our arrow, which don't really need the class name. I think I can just get rid of this, so I can just reference that. And this is our first element, this is our second element. Now, do we need this div? I think we might be able to get away without the div. Oh, but this button, yeah, I'm just going to put that into the nav. What does this do? Compose tweet, because we have this here. It's kind of strange. Okay, so it opens up that. Okay, so we can add that functionality at some point. So now we go from here to here. Obviously, everything is broken on this sidebar here, so let's just work on refixing that with our class list. But as you can see, just the markup, let's put this over here. Whoops, I'll get rid of the wrong one. Let's open to the side. No, it is that one, okay. But yeah, so as you can see, here's The right side here is our original markup. And then here's our new markup, much cleaner. But of course now we have to style it with our classes. So till now enjoying React after hooks, tried Vue too, but still sticking to React, much more popular, stable, and used in many platforms. Yeah, that's what I played around with Vue. I played around with Angular for a little bit. And React, I just really like how they've done a lot of the stuff. It's been fun to play with it from having experience over the last 15 years of just seeing how things have changed and seeing how React has solved a lot of the problems that basically we've all been struggling with over the last 10 to 15 years, or things that like we needed to do just in the way that they handle state, which is something that's always been kind of hard to figure out how to manage passing variables between components, all that kind of stuff. React just does a really good job of a lot of that routing, even though it's not like right in React. It's got yeah, and JSX, I'm really enjoying writing in JSX. I know some people are hit and miss whether they like that, but I really don't like it. State is a headache. Yeah, I would say it's a head game for sure. It's something that can be super complex, but the more time you spend planning on it, it's really easy to go overboard with state as well. That it's similar to sort of the approach that I'm taking with the CSS is I like to try to do whatever I can without state if I can, and then when I can't figure out or when I absolutely need it, then I'll add state. But yeah, because it's really easy to just fall onto state as a kind of go-to thing for managing data when it is very easily overboard. So let's get our colors. We've got our white, black, blues, blued, blue. One thing I'm noticing is I'm not really sure how these other stop. Okay, that makes more sense. We hadn't refreshed, so now we're in this strange spot. So maybe actually we will clean up the markup. We'll finish cleaning up the markup so that way at least we can get the layout working, and then go from there. So now instead of this being our main, this is our main, but it's our center column. So instead of calling it main though, I'm going to call it a section, and I'm going to give it a name of tweets. And that way I'm not using, that way my whole setup can be the main, and then everything will be within that. Twitter doesn't really have a header, so there's not like a header and footer. Typically you'd have like a header, main, footer, but this one, everything's kind of the main. Nested array and states is headache actually, yeah. Yeah, so how do you mean nested arrays? Like objects within objects, or like arrays within arrays, I guess, is what you're kind of referring to? So in our center here, we've got this kind of is the header, so I may actually put that into a header, but it's the header of this section. So we can call this header because we can reference it from within the section. And then we don't really need that in a span. I think the reason that I was doing that was because I wanted to have this on either side, but we can actually do that by making header itself a flex, and these anchors will split to either side without having to have that. So that's a little bit cleaner. We do need our classes here for the icon. Then we've got our tweet form class, so we know that it's a form. Right now it's the only form on the page, so that's perfectly fine, and it's the form inside the section, so we can reference it that way. And then we've got our profile image. So we'll leave the class of profile image, but what do we need for styling for it? So it's kind of this and then this. There's like a box. and this is underneath this. So we've got an item here, and then we've got another flex with column, or with aligned columns. So I'm gonna keep the image, and then we do need a container for this stuff. We've got our input, and then we've got our buttons. So I can get rid of that, and we do need a container for this because these need to split left to right. And we don't need this hover link because it's going to be styled within this section. Arrays within arrays, yeah. I played around with a friend of mine, and we wanted to write a maze solving algorithm one weekend. So we basically locked ourselves in a room with a whiteboard and built a system, built in code a tool for creating a map, which is arrays within arrays because you've got your rows and your columns, and they're kind of each in there. And then we built some AI to basically solve the maze, which looks like starting the cursor or whatever in running a function on the first square of the maze, and then checking to the right. If you can go that way, don't go that way. If you're checking to the north, if you can go that way, go that way, and go through until you can't kind of go, and then come back and then go the next way, and it kind of goes through the maze and figures itself out. We're working on a survey creator where I'm having array inside array inside array inside object. Yeah, so what is the, do you think that there's a way that you could simplify that? Sometimes it's easier to abstract pieces outside if it gets really, really cumbersome, where you've got these arrays inside of arrays. What is the data structure that you're trying to, that's making it so that you have to put these arrays inside of arrays? And so we don't need a class of button, because I'm just going to say all the buttons are a specific type, and then we can reference them separately. So we've got our tweets, and this part here, I think I will also give it a section, and the name equals tweets. And then instead of a div here, we're going to give this an article. And I think we can kind of do the same thing. We don't need this in a container, but we do need this to have the profile image. And then this is going to be our side container. And now this is where it's going to get a little bit funky. So we've got our top piece here. Then we've got our next piece, and we've got our arrow over here, and we've got this. And beginner, so you can expect it in code like this. Well, it's not just a beginner issue, believe me. I mean, I wrote all of this code here over the last, and I'm going through and basically tearing it all apart and redoing it anyway. And if I had the time, and this is a pretty common thing for most coders that I know, if I had the time, almost every piece of code that I write, I would rewrite it at least 5 or 6 times until it was the way that I like it, because there's always better ways to do things. So this is kind of just like an info piece up at the top. So let's look at our structure here. It does kind of make this the header, and then this is like the title, and then this is the content. And so typically we would give classes to these things so that we can reference them, but in this classless CSS approach, we're actually not doing that. We need to kind of think about our structure a little bit more. And so this is basically going to be an article. This could be the header, and then this . maybe both of these are the header. Yeah, that's what it is. So this is the header. This is the content, and then we've got this arrow. And how are we doing the arrow in here? The arrow is over here, this drop down thing. So I think, and is it in the same lineup? It's in the same lineup as this. So I think it can actually just be a part of this in here. So here's how I'm going to try and structure this. This is kind of a trial and error thing too. So I'm going to try, what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a header. The header is going to first have a span in it, and that span is going to be this. And this is where like John retweeted or whatever that is. Then we have our author info. And then we have our drop down arrow. So this arrow can actually be like this. We don't really need it in its own container. But what that will mean is that we need to put this into a container so that we can basically say this splits and goes to either edge with this. And now instead of this being here, I'm going to give this an H2. And then we don't really need these classes here. So we know that the anchor is going to be a specific style. We know that the Burton Media, or the tag, is going to be a specific style. And then are they the same? They're basically the same. So, and it's all a link, because I think that's the same way. Yeah. All of this will bring me to the tweet. So it's all part of that anchor. So let's see how we got that. So actually, instead of an H2, let's do it that way. Let's make this the H2. And then this goes here, and we can get rid of this span because it's actually the same styling. And then we can move this to here. So then that whole thing becomes a link. We can style the H2 so that it goes top and bottom, and then that will push these two aside. So then our tweet body, this whole thing is an article. We have our container, we have our header. So let's just make this a div. We could theoretically make this a main if we wanted to. Header, footer, main. Header, main, footer. But I think I'll just leave it at a. Div, and then we have our footer, and we don't need a class because we know it's a footer inside of a tweet article. We don't need this. Oh, and these are our icons, so that's these things here. And I think theoretically, yeah, oh, because they've got text beside them. That's why we have span there, because some of them have this number after it, so we do need to figure that out. So I'm just going to put a number in here, And a number in here. Do I stay in Calgary? Sometimes. Right now I'm actually on Salt Spring Island out on the west coast of BC. But I'm moving back to Airdrie, actually, is where I live, where I'm moving to. That's where I have a condo there. It's like 20 minutes north of Calgary. So I think we will be able to get rid of this span, but I don't know how this outputs. I think it outputs as an SVG on here, which I don't know entirely how much control we have over the styling. So let's take a look. Yeah, because this is there, so we've got this span just so that we can actually have a background and some spacing on it. So I think we'll leave the span in there. We might be able to get rid of it, but we'll leave it for now. You're not from Canada? Cool. So yeah, so you might not even, have you ever been to Canada? Our footer, our div, and then our last part here is going to be article. And then we have this has thread, which let's see what that is in reference to. Oh, show thread. So this particular tweet we made it so that if the thing has a tweet or has a thread, it's got this thing here. I noticed that we don't have the line in there, so we'll need to fix that at some point. But essentially, this show thread, is it? Okay, so the whole thing hovers. Alright, so that's another thing too, is that looks a bit more makes a bit more continuity too. So actually I think this show thread should be inside of that containing article instead of outside of it. So I don't think we're going to need to, everything else is kind of exactly the same. The only difference is we have this thread here at the bottom. And where does that section come from? So I think what I'm going to do is just get rid of this tweet altogether. And we're going to duplicate this one. And then underneath the footer, we will put this. And it's just a div with our profile image and then an anchor. And I think that's all we're going to need. And now we have these two sections, which I'm not sure where the first section was from. Let's actually see where that goes to. So that's our tweets section. And then where does this section go to? Interesting. Oh, I see. So, section main. Yeah, so maybe I will call this main. And instead, I am going to give this a div with a class of wrapper. I probably could get rid of that, but I think I'm going to do that. So now we have our aside, and then we have our main, which is our center column, and then a section for tweets. This. You're from India? Oh, cool. Looking forward to moving to Canada. Very cool. Where in India are you from? I love India. Spent a few months in Rishikesh and a few other places, Delhi and Rajasthan. I really enjoyed it there. You never been out of the country? You're looking forward to moving to BC or Alberta? Cool. Yeah, definitely. Both are great options. BC's really nice, especially like all year round. It's pretty comfortable. Alberta can get pretty cold in the winter and has some really long winters at times, but the mountains are amazing to check out. So that gives us our section, and so I'm hoping that our bottom tag here and oh, actually we need a main. We need to end with our main. That was the tweet section, and then I think this should be our main that we need to end. But it doesn't seem to be doing it. So let's see where this is connected. No. Main. Our form, we got our section, our article, which is the first tweet, our article, which is the second tweet, and then our section, which is tweets, and then our main, which for some reason is connecting down here. I'm going to get rid of that and hope that now... There we go. So now it's connected to that. So our main's done. Now we're onto our right sidebar. So we have our other aside. And we'll leave that. We don't need a form or a class on the form. We'll get rid of the what's happening. So that gives us our search. That's this part here. And then our what's happening section. So that'll be a section there. So this will be a section with the name of what's happening. I'm just going to put what. And I'm going to put happening. So we have our H4, and then so each of these are going to be happening. So instead of giving these a class of happening, I'm going to make them articles, and that way I can say an article within the happening section. Looks like this. And in that we need it to look like, so we have two different types, one that's got this image beside it and one that's got this thing beside it here. I think we can probably go with a left and right setup on here, and that would work for both of them. So we do kind of have this happening left and happening right. So I can just do this. I don't really need this, so it's going to know and push those apart. And our article. And then we have our meta and our text. So this is likely going to be happening right, and this is that angle down. So this one here is more like the other one. This is more like the image. So for the image ones, we just have the title and the text. So I'm going to basically say that this is like an H4. No, H5. This is our div. Just curious, why are you making them classless? Yeah, so it's a modern style of approach to building CSS that essentially just makes for much cleaner markup. So here's something I was working on. Open folder. It's a good question for sure. This UI. So typically, one of the things that's kind of like challenging in writing code is coming up with names for classes. So how do you name things? Because every developer names them differently. And you can follow methodologies like the BEM methodology, which is the block element model methodology. But I write CSS tons of different times, and I might write the code differently. I've been doing it long enough that I have pretty good consistency, but it's still a challenge every single time. How do I label this? How do I name that? So the idea is, rather than naming things with classes, if you write really good markup, which means like labeling things appropriately, you can make your HTML a lot cleaner. And now that we have these like header, these things we didn't have before, so like these are fairly new. It's been about 5 or 6 years since we've had them, but you can label things a header, you can label things a main and an aside. And so in here you can see this here is super clean markup, right? And so if I open this with live server, and then we take a look at the styles in here, I've got some variables set up. So this is kind of my variables that are set up. And then everything is styled using those variables, as well as with just like main aside. So here's a main that the first item is an aside. And we give it the grid area of sidebar, and we do all of this stuff here based on these selectors versus the classes. And what that does, so in the end, this entire thing here is created using that. So there's no classes in this. You'll keep that in mind. Yeah, it's a new approach. It's a fairly new approach. So people are starting to play around with it, but I find it really cool. So even this here, there's no classes on here, and I've made this so that you can open up these side menus here. And if you write it really clean, what you can do too, so the only classes that I do have in here is if I have our layout classes. So I can just say layout sidebar right, and automatically now the sidebar's on the right, and that's with changing one thing. I can even do layout no sidebar, just changing one class, and now there's no sidebar. Or layout full screen, I think I called it. No, it must be maybe full page. Full width. See, even in this, it's like, I don't even remember what I called these ones here, but now I've got a full width layout so that the navigation's at the top. It also makes code cleaner without class names. Yeah, exactly. The HTML gets really clean doing it this way, because it's not muddied down with all the class names here, and then you can see like, okay, this is just an anchor tag inside of these things. And so the one thing that I'm doing on the new section part is I'm doing section and then a name. So I'll give it a name, because that makes sense. Like, what is the name of this? Because you can reference things via the name by doing like div name, or maybe if you got a section, you can do section name equals sidebar, or even I think without. Yeah. And that way, because it does kind of make more sense to give it a name instead of a class. Classes ideally are meant for, here's a template of something that you want to kind of repeat, whereas a name really references that specific name. IDs, it's the same kind of idea for sure as doing an ID. And then with this too, so I can actually, this is all themed as well, so I can come into here and just change this blue to say I want this blue instead, and just by changing that, come back over into here, and I guess, oh, no, that's not it. Where is it? Primary dash blue. Oh, because I'm not watching this SASS, that's why. It's not compiled. So there, now that's, but now the blue, everything is here. So if I go back to here and go back to my sidebar left, now I've updated that just with that one line of code. If I wanted to change, say, the background color from this white, to be more, maybe like some yellow tinge to it, I can do that. And then that background changes. And all my spacing and everything is like that too, so all my typography, it's all based on these variables. So then essentially I can, I'm going to put these colors back. Colors are back. Yeah. But what I could do is I could create a .dark mode. So if I wanted to create a dark mode, I could grab these colors and just override them. So our root, this will become black, this will become white. That's not a good way to do it. We still have those colors, but we can do this. So our primary now becomes, it can stay the blue, but our background color becomes black, our font color becomes white, our heading color can stay the primary, the header background color can maybe also become the black, the header font color can be the white. Let's just try that. And then all we have to do is come into here and give our body a class of dark. Is it not compiling? Styles. It says it's watching. Oh, maybe it's, yeah, maybe we have to do this. Maybe we can't put it on the root scope there. There, yeah, so there we go. So there's our instant dark mode. Obviously we need to change these styles because it's not really that readable here. But essentially now all I need to do is remove this class of dark mode, and you could just use a little bit of JavaScript to toggle that class on the body. And that's how you can just go from instant light mode to dark mode without changing anything except for one line of code. And you can do that with themes as well. So if you wanted to override all of these colors and create your own theme, you could just put these colors into here instead of these, and then you could just change these. So like maybe the black is like this, maybe our white is like super white, maybe our gray is more towards the blue, maybe our blue is much darker, and then this could be our intense theme. And then the same thing, all we'd have to do is give this a class of intense, and on the other side, if it works, class of intense, overriding the colors. not sure. Interesting. So the other variables are overriding, but for some reason these aren't. Maybe I spelled it wrong. Index class equals intents. Well, I'm not sure why that is not working, because our dark mode did just work, but it could be like a scoping thing. What happens if I do this? No. Intents root. Yeah, maybe for some reason these colors aren't overriding. These must be taking precedent, but we did see that we could change them here. So actually what we could do, I think that might be what's happening. It's like a scoping thing. So if we do this, what does that do? Yeah, there we go. So that's what it was. So the colors, because they're on the root, they're not really, it's not updating these. It's because at the root scope, so that's what happened here. So the root scope, we set these colors, and then we set these variables based on that root scope. But then we're changing these colors at the body scope, which means that these need to also then be overridden. So essentially you'd probably create a separate CSS of just variables that you would use, but you can see how we have this. If we go into the code and we just look at the body class and we remove intents, we're back to our other styling. Alright, back to Twitter. Does that all make sense on that approach? Definitely makes for a lot cleaner code. So we don't need this, and I think we're probably okay just using a paragraph tag inside of here. Makes sense, cool. And then, so essentially we have this, and then we have our image. So instead of this, I'm just going to, oh, what did I call it? Rounded image instead of profile image? Yeah, rounded image, that's what I want to do, because that makes more sense. So there was profile image, and I want to replace it with rounded image. So it's more descriptive than profile image, and that's just saying that anytime you put that class on it, it'll be a rounded image. Back into our happening. And so this here, because we do need to split this left and right, we do want, this is not actually a rounded image, so that one doesn't, because it's this type of image, so we'll specifically style it separately. So then that gives us our kind of template here, which we can apply to our next happening. We got our article, we have our div, and then basically there's our h5, which is our top piece there. This becomes a paragraph. And then we have our submeta. So I think I'll probably handle that. This is a div. Let's just put that in a span. And Actually, I'm going to put this in a footer, because that's kind of... Yeah, maybe we'll do that. Header and footer instead of H5. We'll put this in a header, and then we have our paragraph. And then our header and footer in there. So it's kind of what this is. We got a header, and we got a footer, and then we got our text in between. And then we have our arrow over on the other side. And that is, this becomes our happening right, and really all we need for it is just the anchor tag, because we can split it based on, I don't know why these are, this should be a div. This ends that div, then we have our anchor, and then this becomes our article. Not artiste, article. Then we have this happening footer, which is show more. So this is in the container of that. So this can just be a footer. And actually we can make this a header, and put it as still an H4, because that kind of gives it, using the H's is a good way to say like the importance that this is like a fourth level heading, because we've got maybe like this would be our first level heading, these would be our second level headings, so we could actually maybe make this a third level heading. Yeah, let's do it a third level heading. And that's just really for screen readers and accessibility, because it doesn't make a difference to us. It's kind of on the back end what container you put it in. You can style it even without having this. I could just make it a header and have it. But if I put this H3 in, then screen readers they can basically say skip to the next header, and it'll read the next header. So if you have this H3, it'll go through all the H1s, then it'll go through all the H2s, and then it'll go through the H3s. So this is our header, this is one of our happenings, this is a second happening, and then this is our footer. And in there we've just got an anchor with show more. We don't need that on another line. And that's our center section, which I think is actually our main. Is that correct? Yeah. No, sorry, this is section. This is a section. The happening section. And so that's inside of this aside. Okay, so we have our happening section, although this is also what's happening. What is happening? Who to follow. Okay, so this will end up being, whoops, our section name equals who. How much extent accessibility matters? It really depends on the client and what they need. I mean, and obviously to your target audience, that's probably the biggest thing. If you, ideally, it's great to have as much accessibility as possible for people. Yeah, if in a perfect world we'd have all the time in the world to add in all the accessibility. Unfortunately, accessibility tends to be the one thing that has less importance because it costs a lot of money to ensure accessibility. But if you can get into the practice of certain things like these, this is the other reason for this classless CSS, is that then you're kind of forced to really do these things semantically correct, because it's really easy to just put divs everywhere, like you saw at the beginning of how it looked. Just throw divs everywhere with classes on it, and that doesn't tell a screen reader or somebody anything. So by doing this cleaner approach, we actually now are automatically making it more accessible, because the screen reader will know that this is a section and it's got the name happening. So then it's going to say there's a header in there, and the header says what's happening. And then inside of there, there's two articles. The first article has a header that says US News 2 hours ago, and some text that says blah, 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 blah. So by using the classless approach here, we're actually automatically making it more accessible, which is awesome. So I'm going to take the same styling we did here. We had a header with the H3 in it. So we'll do the same thing. We'll give this a header. Oops. With the H3. And then we've kind of got, they're pretty much the same. I guess they're a bit different. They've got the image to the left, then they've got their text, and then they've got the follow button. So in this, we're going to need a container for the left and a container for the right. And the same thing, I'm going to make this an article. And in the article, we're going to have a container for the left, which will have the image, which we'll need, and it's rounded, and then we've got our profile. We need that specifically because these have to go top and bottom. We don't need to give this a class, and then our button can actually just be right beside it because we can style this article accordingly. And so I'm going to just duplicate this, and I'll just take these and put them here, and we'll just do the same thing as that. Obviously this doesn't really matter, but we'll keep it like this. That cleans up that, and then we have our footer for this section, and same thing, we get that show more. And then there's the footer sidebar, which is over here, which is just this text here, so that's super simple. And let's see what we can do with this. We can just call it a footer because it's a footer in the aside with that section. And we'll keep this like that. I think everything there looks good. And then this stuff here is for the pop-up, but for now we're not going to worry about the pop-up because it's hidden and it's yeah, it'll be being styled another way. So I'm going to just make it display none for now. So let's take a look what we're looking at. Here's, I'll get rid of real Twitter. Here's our previous, before we started going classless. And then here's now, and obviously it is a mess, a complete mess, which is totally okay. So let's get started with the classes, and let's clean up these colors as well. So we do have our white and we do have our black, and then we've got this blue subtle, blue dark, and blue. And what I think I want to do with these is I want to make it blue 0, blue 1, and blue 3. And actually this is our 3 and this is our 2. And this is just our darker blue, so let's just do that. And then we've got our grays, and we've got a few different grays in here, and there's a few different approaches to doing this. I've started actually preferring to just include the just the RGB value like this, because then I can do an alpha on it if I want to. but then you don't get the color hinting inside of the editor here. So for now, I think I'm going to do this. And it looks like we have 4 grays at various tones, but they're so close together that it's really hard to tell what they are. So I think I'm just going to come into Twitter, and re-grab some of these colors. And I think we do have 4 different tones. So let's just check. So we've got this placeholder text, which is 1 tone. We've got this. Is that the same tone, which is a different tone? So there's, I think this and this is 1 tone, and this is 1 tone. And then we've got this lighter tone, which is the same as, no, then we've got this other lighter tone for here. So there's 1, 2, 3 tones at least. So I'm going to do gray 0. I'm going to do 1, 2, 3, 1 will be our lighter gray. What is our lightest gray? Let's use this color picker. Let's make this our lightest gray. And then we'll have our gray 2 and our gray 3. Our gray 2 is going to be actually it's going to be this hover. That is the same color. It's so deceiving. It looks different. And so that border is the same, but this border is the darker gray. So there definitely is a darker gray. This is a lighter gray. Oh, because this is not in my notes. So this ends up being the same. Let's try that. Here's our gray 2. So subtly different. So hard to tell. And then we have our darker gray, which is like the text in here. There we go. And then we have our green 2 and our green 1. And then our red 2 and our red 1. And I like this approach for using the numbers so that way I know that like I can do blue, and then 1 is the lightest version, and then I go up from there towards darker ones. And then this is basically our colors by name. And then we can create a section for colors by use. And I'm just going to do a primary, and that's going to be our blue 2. These are sort of primary Twitter color. Okay, so let's get the layout at least working here. Now we have this, so this is much cleaner. Let's take a look at the the comparison. Here's our pre-refactoring, open to the side. Even just look at, here's like the code preview. It's all in one line, sort of fairly clean, and then here's the code preview in the other one. It's like way longer, way more complicated versus this. It's just so much cleaner. So we don't need a class of wrapper yet. We might if we want to do that, but I think for now I'm just going to do this. Let's see if we can set this up. So we do have sort of spacing on either side, and then we do have an aside, we have a main, and another aside, and that's how this is kind of laid out. So let's set that up first. Let's set our main up. Oh yeah, we have a main, and then we have another main. This is actually a section. Name equals no, maybe I do want this to be main, which means I need to change this top one. The only reason we need to do that is because the body should, in theory, I believe, be the whole page. So we create this div. That's our pop-up. Here's our aside. So we do need to end this div, I believe. No. Where? This is our pop-up. Where does this end? So that is in the wrong spot. This button, this article, we have, no, we got a div, we have an extra div here, so we've got just some extra divs hanging out in here. We have our footer there, we have our other aside, and so now this should end that div, and then we've got our pop-up afterwards, which this is just modal stuff. That should be better. So now we've got our first div inside the body tag, which is kind of our wrapper. We could give it a class of wrapper, but we can also just reference it by body div. So that's just the first div inside the body. And we're going to make this a display I'm going to do a display grid, grid template columns. We will say 33% oops. Or let's pull up our old styles and just see how we styled it to make sure. I do want to put some resets on as well. So let me do that first. Here's just some resets. So we're setting the margin of everything and the padding of everything to 0 and the box sizing border box. I do want to change this a little bit as I've started doing this. So we do that on the box, on the HTML, and then we do after or before, and then we do box sizing inherit. inherit. So that way, basically, because otherwise if we put box sizing on star, it automatically sets that and you have to override it, whereas if we do inherit, then if we set box sizing for some reason on a div, the containing ones will inherit that box sizing, because that's the more likely case that we want to do. I will put this here. I've started to use normalized CSS a little bit more, which is a little bit more specific as opposed to this global just margin padding 0, but for the purpose of this, we'll keep it at that. We'll leave our font the same for now, and our background color will be the white. And that's good. So the first div inside the body, display grid. What did we do for this here? Our wrapper, we had a width of 1250 in our 0 or auto, and we had our we did it with flex, but I'm gonna do it with grid instead. So let's do this. This gives us our width. And we doesn't look like we actually gave a specific width. So let me go into here and just take a look. Font size, yeah, there's no width. The middle section, it has the width of 600 pixels, and then the other two basically fill that space, it looks like. Oh no, the right actually has a 350. So it's just this one here that kind of flexes with the style. So what I'm going to try is do our template columns. We'll put one fraction for this one. We'll say 600 pixels for the center, and then 350 pixels for the right. And that should at least, oh yeah, because we opened up that other live server demo. So we're not seeing our columns show up here. And it's not actually doing our width. So let's just make sure body div. Let's give this a background. Oh, that's why. It's probably working. I have to watch SASS on here as well. So then it'll recompile the minified CSS. That looks good. There we go, that looks better. So now we've got our center column, we've got our right column and our left column. Let's give it a little bit of a gap. It looks like we've got maybe, say, 50 pixels in there. So I've got a couple different sizing things here. I've got maybe 50 pixels. This one's maybe 20 pixels. There's a tiny gap at the top there, which I won't worry about for now. But I'm going to start to think about the space of here and what the needs are for the spaces. So in that, we'll go sizing. And I will do like space. You gotta go, it's midnight. Sounds good. Thanks for stopping by and thanks for chatting. It was fun to connect with you. Look forward to seeing you next time. I'm here every Monday from 10 a.m. till noon my time, so obviously it seems it must be 10 to midnight your time. And then on Wednesday evenings from 5 till 7, which would be 5 a.m. to 7 a.m. for you, I imagine. I do pixel art and game development, so good luck with your coding and look forward to chatting again soon. Sweet. So I'll just start with that and see, and what I'm going to do is give the column gap. We'll use space 2 for that. Space 2. And in there we will say column gap. Column gap. There we go, and that might be a bit big, so I'm going to change it down to 4. I will be right back. Okay, back here. Yeah, that looks pretty good. And one thing that I can do, I'm not going to worry about being able to change the spacing on it. But I will give this a name of left of navigation. I think navigation. Yeah, that's definitely navigation. So we will call this, I'll just give it left. Left sidebar. And then we can reference this. Name equals left sidebar. And let's give a background color of red just to see if that's working. Perfect. Now in here we do need to display flex and just flex direction column and then justify content space between, and that should throw our interesting. Okay. What happens here? Okay, because it's fixed. So that's the other part too, is that we do have these fixed pieces. So let's give that a shot. Let's make this position fixed. height 100 view height. But what that does is then our grid gets thrown off. And our grid gets thrown off. Sticky top 0. Okay, there we go. That works. Then we've got our thing, and then our thing. Boop. It looks like actually we need this to be inside of here, because does that actually take us home? Is it a link? Yeah, it just takes us back to home. And is it the same styles? Yeah, it's basically the same. It just has a different, it doesn't have text after it, and it's got a little bit more space underneath it. So that works. Active class is fine. And these are all going to be changed into SVGs, I believe. So let's see what happens when we do nav SVG. We'll do a font. Or can we do like width of 40 pixels? Does that actually affect the SVG? Okay, so maybe we actually have to do it by eye and font size. To rem. So that's interesting. So we can set the font size of the anchor, which will adjust the font size of the icon, but because it actually gets replaced with JavaScript, one sec. Sorry about that. I'm back. Yeah, so this is an interesting thing with Font Awesome, is that with the JavaScript version, it actually replaces the icons, the eyes, with SVGs. I wanted to take a look and find a better way to handle this, but I think what I'm going to do for now is just say width for rem and do important, which is not the way I want to handle it, but in the interest of... Oh, so it doesn't even actually style the SVG anyway. Yeah, so that doesn't even actually style that anyway. So, the only way that I can think of quickly to do this would be to give it a span, and then in our markup, we will just wrap our icon in a span. And there, that works. It's not ideal, but it'll work for now. The other way we could do it, which may make more sense, is actually to put the text in a span, and then give the anchor a font size and then change the span size to less, but either approach works. And then we've got our tweet button. So let's style that accordingly. So our spans, we actually probably wanted about 3, which is 30 pixels. That looks about right. And those icons are kind of the same. So just noticing, actually, no, that's okay. This nav itself can be a display flex. Nav display flex, flex direction column. There we go. Might be a little bit big. Let's make this 2.8, and then we want our anchors font size to be 1.8 rem, and text decoration none, and beside here we'll put a margin right of 1 rem. We'll go through and change these variable names afterwards, but that looks pretty good. And then each one of these, we actually want them to be aligned beside each other, which doesn't seem to be happening. So that's actually, yeah, that's a good point. So we will actually change this so that span goes around the text. Yeah. So I can get rid of this. And the reason for that is because we want to make the anchors display flex, which will allow us to align them center. that will allow us basically to give some padding to this. So let's do 0.8 m and 1.5 m, and then our hover, we do a background color of blue 1. Our anchors are color inherit, and then we want our dot active and our, no, just our dot active. We want the color to be primary. Make this a display flex. Align item center. Oh yeah, now we actually have to do, so our, this is going to be 1.8, our navigation anchor, and I need to change this. So our span is actually going to be font size 1.8 and margin left 1 rem. Let's make these our rems instead. Margin left. Six, 2.6. Our icons are black except for the active one as well, and then the hover. So the hover actually does set the color too. So we can actually just do this active. Move this into here. Let's do a display block on everything in there. So it's strange that the anchor itself and hover or dot active. Oh, because each thing inside there hover. Yeah, there we go. That's better. And how does it handle it? It fits to the container. So we do need a little bit of space. Margin. Margin 2.5 rem. Let's do that. And we want it to be my flex, line item center. We don't want it to grow. We want it to just flex shrink. So if I turn off flex, what happens then? Same thing, display, inline block. Okay, so we will have to figure out how to make these not expand. And I thought I had an active one. Just home class equals active. So we do have that class equals active. So why? Oh, because for the same reason. We need and dot active. So we're working on SASS. So then that blue, but the color is not showing up, and it looks like they're also bold. So we'll give it a font weight of 600. And it's saying our color should be primary. Why is our color one DA, one F2? That seems like one DA, one F2. Either way, we do need a border radius of 2.5 rem. Let's see how that looks. Still strange on that color. Oh, and the first one is always blue. So let's do that. And colon first child color. It's not letting me change that color. Color blue. For some reason the variables are not showing up. Oh. There we go. There we go, that looks better. And it doesn't it's only the hover that has that. So the background color is on both of them. Or no, sorry, the color is on both of them. But the background color is, so I can do, yeah, no, I have to do it separate. So, and hover, background color. There, so that fixes that. Let's get this button done. I think I'm just going to do a global button. Border none. Background color. Primary. Color is going to be white. And our padding is going to be 1.8, 0.8 m and 1.5 m. We'll see how that looks. And our cursor will be a pointer, and then our and hover background color will be our blue 3. I think actually what I'm going to do is primary dark. And then there will be our border radius 2.5 rem. Now I do need these to not stretch, but that we can work on next time. I think by default I'm going to make the button 1 and 1.5. Yeah. And then what have I got here? We don't actually need this class. It's just, oops, a button. So in here, in our nav, so actually I can do this. That's our anchor there. So this goes like that, and then we have one more. And now our button. So button, we just give it a font size of 1.6 rem. Yeah, that looks pretty good. I think maybe it should be a little bolder. So we got that. This yellow is our aside. So next we need, I think it's the footer? No, just an anchor. So I will put this into a footer because I do not want to style all anchors in this. And I could do last child, but this is really a footer, so it makes sense to put this in here. So then I can go footer, And in there, I can reference the anchor. And we'll get this rounded image. So let's do that too. Dot rounded image. Border radius 50%. Overflow hidden. Object fit. Contain. And max width 7 rems, so 70 pixels. So we'll just do that. I could probably even go smaller than that. It's like 60 pixels. Even smaller, 50 pixels. Yeah, and then this one's actually going to be a little bit smaller, but we'll style that. So our footer and our anchor, we want a margin on the bottom of 1 rem, just to give us some space. And actually that could go on the footer itself. Yeah, let's put that on the footer. And then we've got so make the anchor display flex. Display flex. Line items center. Justify content space between. Good, so that gives us that. And then so we need that same hover. So in that, and this is where SASS can be nice too, is that we can create some mix-ins for this. So we're not having to actually rewrite code. We can essentially put specific styles like this anchor tag where we want to have a background hover. We can put that into a mix-in. So that'll be something that maybe we'll add next time. But for now, I'm just going to do and hover background color, and this will be the I'm going to change this to primary light because that's kind of what we're doing here. We got that blue is primary light blue 1, and that way we can change the primary color. Blue 1, and this is going to be our primary light. And now this also has a border radius of 2.5 rem, so we'll make it consistent. And we need a padding of 0.8 rem, 1.5 rem. Let's see how that looks. And we need to adjust. So our first div needs to be display flex. That we say display flex. And have to probably call it pretty soon here. I was hoping to get this finished, but we're so close. I just wanted to get this side navigation done. Let's see what we can do. I'm going to give 2 to the bottom instead, and actually the image inside of here, we need a max width of 4 rem instead of the 5. So let's see how that looks. That looks a bit better. And we'll need to do a margin right of 1 rem. Alright, so that's pretty close. So I've got some guests coming into the house, so I'm going to have to call it here, unfortunately. We're pretty close to finishing up at least this column here. But as you can see, we've switched this over to some super clean markup. Just the no class is just so nice. It just looks so much nicer. And we're starting to get into the styles here and using SASS, and that's a lot cleaner as well. So far we've only had to add 1 class to the entire thing. And we've done some pretty good work. So we'll call it here for this week. And we'll be back next Monday, same time, 10 a.m. till noonish on Pacific time. And we'll be here on Wednesday evening from 5 p.m. till 7 p.m. doing some pixel art, probably game development. So thanks for hanging out, and we will see you next time. Bye. Much love.